Welcome to HortTube. My name is Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do pretty much every Sunday. You can ask gardening questions down in the comment section below this video, and I pick from those each week. I don't know how many there are here. It's 20 some questions from last week's video. Again, thank you guys for your participation, because without you, there's not a subscriber question and answer video. This past week, I put up a video. You will have seen a video on Mahonia, just as a January flowering plant. They typically flower in January in my area. They'll flower at different times, obviously, depending on where you are. But in my area in Raleigh, we tend to see the peak flowering sometime January into early February, something like that. Depends on how much it, cold dips down. Of course, I said in that video that they're very deer resistant. Spiny ones and non-spiny ones typically. And of course, 3 or 4 people said that deer eat theirs down below the video. So that's pretty much the history of the 1,500 videos that I've put on the channel. If I've said something is deer resistant, somebody has a deer will eat it. It just doesn't even matter what it is. It seems like probably outside of oleander, because then deer wouldn't just, because it's poisonous. But outside of that, I probably every video I ever said it in. If you read the comments down below, somebody's deer will eat it. So I would give caution to anything that you're planting if you have heavy deer pressure, just buying 1 of or 2 of, and testing things before you, go all in and plant 30 of something that's going to cost you a ton of money, and then the deer are going to eat them, or you're going to have to protect them forever. You may just want to test things if you have heavy deer pressure, even if you've read they're deer resistant. Then a video on cryptomeria that, as I'm filming this, is probably going to publish in 12 minutes while this is going on. Japanese cedars, there's tons of them at the Ralston. We have several in our garden. I've always been a big giant fan of Cryptomeria japonica. Let's see. The Learn to Garden video series will be getting new content on it next week. You see palm trees behind me. I'm actually shooting this near Fort Lauderdale. Is actually where I'm at right this minute. Steph and I took a couple weeks. We took the big trip out west and did some content related things, visited some nurseries. Most of that was about connections. Got back to the house, did some work there. We had already planned this trip down to Florida for a couple of weeks. I've shot a couple videos over in St. Augustine, and working on some other things. And I've got hopefully what I think will be one of the biggest pieces of news probably the biggest piece of news I've ever had on this channel sometime in the next couple of months. So working on that. Somebody said something about, before I jump into the question, about the ads. The ads, especially in these Q&A videos are 40 minutes long. You're going to get several ad breaks during them. And I just throwing out there that I actually have, you can get YouTube Red. I know everybody has 900 subscription things, but watching YouTube with no ads changes YouTube completely. I probably have 50% of my viewing time is YouTube related, not gardening. It's things, my release away from talking about gardening all the time on YouTube, but without ads. So I strongly suggest trying it at some point and watching YouTube without ads for a little while. They don't sponsor the channel in any way, shape, or form, obviously. But if they would, that would be nice. But I do think that if you ever do the YouTube Premium in whatever version it is, man, it changes YouTube completely. Anyway, just throwing that out there. That is available. First question. So I put up the Mahonia video, and somebody had actually asked a question on last week's Q&A about Mahonia. Will they grow under a large live oak in full shade? In any particular Mahonia do better in drought. They want some winter bee food, which is a good choice for that. They're all pretty much very drought tolerant, but anytime you're talking about planting under established trees, it's going to take longer for that plant to actually get rooted in and settle in. But the Asian Valley is what they call it at the Ralston, where most of the Mahonia and the Aspidistra and other very drought tolerant shade evergreens reside, is in a very, very dry space with a ton of root competition, probably to the point of being too much root competition for most of those plants. and they do fine. Again, if you're planting something with established things, it's just going to take longer for that thing to establish itself against something that's wanting to kill it. Now, when you say large live oak, they're different shaped and size live oaks. I mean, live oaks can have single trunks and then the branches kind of go up and out slightly. Those are good candidates probably for having underplanting with evergreen shrubs, with whatever underneath them. But then there are live oaks that, you know, have very low branching and the branches, you know, head back down to the ground. And so I just don't know what kind of clearance you have under it. Will it be limbing itself up more over time and providing more or less light? You know, I don't know what your live oak looks like. There is a point where even Mahonia is not going to want to be in that much shade. So again, I just don't know what type of, you know, what your live oak actually looks like. But if it's very low branching, you're probably going to have a hard time growing things up under them. At the Ralston, they have two that are low branched when you go in. And they do have some things planted under it, but it's you know, liriope and interesting liriopes and some other ground cover things. They have more ground cover things underneath the live oaks as you go in than there's really not a lot of shrubs under that at all. There's some ruscus under it, but most everything else, and there's some oak leaf hydrangea under there, under one of them, I remember that, but most of it's just ground cover stuff that, you know, drought tolerant ground cover things. Okay, we're moving to question 2. So somebody had a camellia planted in a barrel. The barrel's rotted away. It's not getting enough sun anyway, so they were wondering if they dared move it. So it's on just a mound, I guess, right this minute. I think you definitely want to move it, especially if it's not happy anyway, if it's not getting enough sun. And you would do it late winter, early spring. So I don't know where this person was in terms of how cold it is, how late their cold would be, but I would think sometime around March, you know, I would pop. It's going to be easy digging since it's above ground to get it moved. But I would leave it mounded up just a bit. You know, most of those roots that are up near the top of this thing, if not, I wouldn't want to sink them too deep down in the ground. So even when you move it, I'm going to mound that plant up probably just a hair more than I might normally. Okay, so if a person composted in the fall, should they apply organic fertilizer in the spring, or is it unnecessary? They don't like the look of hardwood mulch, so they like the look of compost that they're making or buying in. They're putting it down across all of their beds in the fall. Wanted to know if it's still necessary to fertilize. Probably not. It may not be necessary to, you know, it's probably not necessary for me to fertilize, and I'm going to do it just so I can talk about how little I need to fertilize. So you probably almost certainly can get away without fertilizing. You can, you know, look at your plants. I mean, I don't know if you've ever done a full, you know, a soil test on it. There might be something you're low in that little bit of organic fertilizer might help with on a season-to-season basis. I don't know without knowing. But I would think if you're using new compost every fall on your beds, you're not going to need to fertilize for sure. Okay, number 4. So somebody asked, they're over in Europe, in Holland, and wanted to know if we have Viburnum tinus and arrowhead viburnum here in the south. In the south, interestingly, those two are so different. Viburnum tinus is definitely more cold sensitive. So we are in Raleigh, I'm on the northern edge of where Viburnum tinus does very well because they bud up super early. Like the Viburnum tinus was already blooming at NC State 2 weeks ago. So Viburnum tinus, we're on, you know, Raleigh is right at the top of where they'll grow, and they grow pretty much south of where we are. And then arrowhead viburnum's completely the opposite of that, where we're on the very southern end of where arrowhead viburnums do very well. But we can grow both of them in Raleigh, and they said they just hadn't seen much, you know, on the channel about them. I've avoided Viburnum tinus at the house because 7 out of 10 winters I'm going to be disappointed that the buds get burned on it, and it really doesn't open any flowers. Beautiful when they do, beautiful foliage. We planted them on a foundation planting in that series of videos that we did earlier this year, where we did like 5 videos of putting in a landscape. Hers look great because they're down in a low bowl up against the house. That's where I have to put Viburnum tinus. Arrowhead viburnum probably needs a little more shade in the Raleigh area because we're zone 8A, and they're typically zone 5 to 7 is where they like to be. But interesting combo of viburnums that they said do well for them in Holland. Yes, we can grow both of them over here as well. Let's see. Somebody wants to plant sweet peas up a blue spruce because they don't want it on a trellis. Will it be detrimental to the blue spruce? If you know, typically I would say if you're growing an annual vine like that, like sweet peas, that wouldn't do pretty much enough damage at long enough to do any damage to your plants. With a conifer like this, a slow growing conifer, I would probably be more cautious than I would be on other things. So that would be, you know, that's what I'm throwing out there, because if it's on there long enough to do some damage, that damage will last much, much longer. Whereas if it came up through a leafy evergreen and bloomed on the top of it, you know, and if it did a little damage here or there, you could do a little pruning on it and boom, you know, or deciduous shrub, it doesn't matter. Any kind of shrub that can be reset. Whereas conifers are so slow to recover. I doubt it would do any damage in a seasonal vine growing up it. You know, I don't know how big the tree is either. But if it did, again, it would take longer to recover. So I'm probably not going to risk growing vines on my conifers. Although I had a grape on a cryptomeria in the backyard for, you know, months and months and months, and, you know, cut it off and it was fine. But who knows? It grows much faster though. So somebody asked if we can grow winterberry hollies here. So I think they were in my area asking this question, and they're designing it. They were in the Northeast designing a garden for somebody that lives near me and wanted to know, they're designing a winter interest garden, wanted to know if winterberry hollies do well here, or Ilex verticulata. Yes, very. We have, our highways are lined with them. So in the fall, you can see on what we call the outer loop 540, or the outer belt line. They've planted lots of them on that. We have tons and tons of winterberry hollies here in our area, and they do show off beautifully in during the fall and early winter. Let's see. So somebody is in zone 8B. They have their liriope in full sun. It has anthracnose, and you'll see anthracnose. You'll see rust. You see, there are a few problems liriope can get, and once it typically gets it, I think it's best to dispose of them. I've never been able to kind of those are containers in the nursery that I would eye and throw out, just because I didn't want it spreading throughout. You know, when we go and cut all the liriope back, we'd be spreading these things about. But if I saw any kind of leaf related issues on the liriope, we would cull those out pretty quickly. They have been trying fungicides and they don't work. That's usually the case. What evergreen thing would they place along the sidewalk to replace it? They're down in, I think this was down in Tech, I can't remember, but it's full sun, zone 8B. You know, there's not a lot of things that will stay that compact and that evergreen, you know, and line up as little soldiers like that in full sun. You know, Carex is a replacement for it, but it really needs some shade. You know, so I don't know that you're going to find a whole lot. You could certainly try something like blue fescue, although it's probably going to be a little hot for blue fescue as well. I would look at it as an opportunity to decide whether or not you need something, you know, that outlines the bed like that. It may be an opportunity to put, you know, a grouping of some sort of low perennial here and something else, you know, and alter it up a little bit, maybe change the design some so that you're not relying on a single plant to take care of this, because when you do sometimes rely on a single plant like this, it leaves you making decisions like this later of what's the next single plant that I could find to replace that problem. So, you know, again, I saw somebody, you know, pull out some pyracantha off a bank that had some root rot related issues, and then went in and put ground cover roses right back in their place. They're both in the rose family, and, you know, the roses ended up with a problem right after that. So it's like this, I would look for solutions to solve these monoculture related disease issues by having less of a monoculture, you know, planting a variety of things to help solve your problem. Okay, all right. I hope that makes sense. Let's see. So somebody, okay, this is a great question. Benefits. This is the one that Jim will get himself in trouble today. Okay, all right. Benefits of a raised bed garden for vegetables versus in-ground. They're in zone 8A in Atlanta. So, okay, the only reasons I could think of to have raised beds, okay, for your garden would be age related. So just bending over. It's tough to bend over in a garden. We all know that. I'm 54, had to rethink that from a week ago. And at 54, I don't want to be bending over like that much. So I can imagine by the time I'm 70 or something, I am definitely not going to want to be on my hands and knees in the garden for sure. So that is that can be an issue. So it's age. Maybe my soil has some sort of issue, like I'm in an area with very high, alkaline soils that are just so alkaline that I can't really do anything about it. So I'm going to use a raised bed there. Maybe my soil's super rocky, and I just don't think I can even challenge the rocks that are out there, getting them out of the ground. So there's reasons like those that I could come up with as reasons why I would have raised beds. But outside of that, really none, because typically the materials that we're filling those barrels up with, you can fill those barrels up with some organic material that's, you could start with big logs and that kind of thing down at the bottom of it. There are different ways to do this, but I don't think you'll end up with as nutrient dense food from those bags of black gold materials at the garden centers and the box stores as you will having them in the ground. So for me, I'm going to take my lumps the first few years and improve my own soil. Over the long haul, I think you're going to end up with more nutrient dense food, less fertilizer required, less ongoing. Let me fill these raised beds up again because that organic material keeps sinking down in them. Overall, less cost. But initially, if you get it right, because there'll be a couple people that'll comment down below this video that they did raised beds, and then the combo of stuff that they used they just didn't produce good food. Period. They were overwatered or underwatered or whatever. It's kind of hard to also get this mix right in these raised beds. But if you'll initially kind of take your lumps and improve your existing soil in this space that you want to garden in, over time you can improve it more and more and more by adding compost, and eventually win that space. Our vegetable garden in Raleigh, I can take a shovel and dig down, put the shovel 8 to 10 inches down in the ground without hardly any effort. I can probably stab it 8 to 10 inches down into the ground. That's 3 years of work though, right? But now it's, the food that I get out of there is great. It's definitely more nutrient dense from that actual rock dust, that's in the actual soil. Again, there are reasons why you would have raised beds, and I get it. And gosh, are people pushing them like crazy? Like there's no way that you'd be able to grow vegetables outside of me selling you this metal bin, that sticks up above the ground in your garden. It's just not true, especially somebody in zone 8A, Atlanta. Your soil is perfectly fine. You probably have some clay in it, which although is going to take you a little longer to improve and get your vegetables at peak, your vegetable garden peaking, peak level like you'd want it, the nutrients that are in that clay will help grow more nutrient dense vegetables in the future. Does the container material size location affect hardiness of a plant? Okay. Well, I guess the size of the container definitely affects it, right? The more mass that you have, the more difficult it is for the night temperature to freeze that container solid, right? What we're guarding against is the container being frozen solid, because then, there's no water that can exchange between the bottom and the top. Also, a lot of this depends on what plants that you're growing, obviously. The material it's made out of, probably not so much. If it's a big, thick, I don't know what the insulation is, between, clay versus concrete versus fiberglass versus whatever. I doubt there's a whole lot of difference in how much more cold hardy. Those materials are going to make your plant. Certainly plastic containers bend and change as they freeze. So as everything in that container freezes and expands, it doesn't crack open like some of the other containers might. So there's that thought. The location definitely has an impact. So I want, when I left the house for this trip and it was going to be 16 at the house, I put the plants on the south side of the foundation so that they would warm up during the day and definitely thaw out, okay, during the day. So I had mine packed together, so I got more mass with a light cover on top, and that cover will allow water to get through if it rains, and also it being south facing allowed them to warm up enough during the day to hopefully thaw out a bit if that big mass had unfrozen. So I don't think the material will help you of whatever the thing's made out of, unless you had some sort of I don't even know. They're going to freeze from the top down just as much as they're going to freeze from the sides in. So even if you had some sort of insulation around the base of it, they still can freeze right from the top down into that container. The size of it has some impact. It takes a lot more to freeze a large mass, and the location matters. So I think that's it. Okay. And they had some Carex in plastic pots. Most of the Carex is zone 5 hardy, so I don't know where you were. Most of that's probably going to be okay regardless, even if it freezes a night or two. Okay, so somebody said they have ivy. Should they spray now or wait until spring? They want to kill it with Roundup, which is probably the best way to go with ivy, is to just spray it if you can. Again, just a lot of times we're talking about just getting to the starting line, right? We even if we don't want to be spraying, we want to do things differently, we do have to get to the starting line. So that's the thought on that. The best time to actually spray it is in the fall, as it's starting to take on a little bit of fall color, because it actually takes some moisture. It actually pulls water down into its own roots in the fall and stores it just like any other plant's doing. So that's the best time of year to spray it, or definitely when it's actively growing. So I think as you start to see a little bit of new growth, tender new growth on it in the spring, is probably when I would hit it at this point. Somebody has a soft caress Mahonia in a 24-inch pot. It's big and lopsided. They want to prune it into a more natural shape. You can prune it down to the soil level. You could prune it down in half if you wanted to. If it's established, it's got a big root system in this big 24-inch container, you can cut it without any problem. Be careful when you cut container plants back hard, really hard like this, that you back off on the watering just a bit. This thing's not going to use hardly any water for the next few weeks after you do this. I would wait a little later, maybe March, and then cut the thing how you want to cut the thing, and then make sure you're not overwatering it while it's recovering, because it just won't use as much water. But that big root system, it should respond back pretty quickly. You may want to fertilize the container at the same time. So somebody asked, is it too late to cut back bearded iris, or is it even necessary? Most people cut them back in the fall to about 6 inches, tall, and then that's one of those plants that I don't throw on the compost pile unless the compost gets hot. We don't want to spread any diseases that bearded iris can get. That's one that I typically would throw away. Is it too late right now? Probably not, based on how cold it's been recently, but typically the best time to do it is in the fall. I've never tried it in January. I'm guessing it's still probably fine to do it. I do think it's necessary, because I think that clean, fresh, new foliage on them just overall looks better. I got a neighbor 2 doors up from me. He cuts his back every fall down to about 6 inches tall, the fans to about 6 inches tall, sends the material out to the city compost, and his look great every year. Let's see. So somebody asked, best time to plant conifers in 8A north of Dallas. Okay, tips, tricks, and planting. Okay, so the best time to plant conifers in your area would be fall through early spring. You just want to get them established as possible. That being said, there are conifers. When we think I've done so many conifer videos now. I talk about how little heat tolerance many of them have, so that we're pushing, kind of the southern boundaries on some of the conifers we have. But there are lots of conifers that are the opposite, that are, there's podocarpus all over the place I'm staying right now. I've got the palms behind me. There's podocarpus everywhere. You see junipers everywhere. There's Arizona cypress, Italian cypress. There are plenty of, most actual cedars, deodar cedar, that kind of thing. Those are plenty heat tolerant, and I would treat them almost like any other plant you would have in your area. If you're pushing the southern boundary of one, Cryptomeria I would put into that heat tolerant category. But if you're pushing the southern boundary on one, yeah, you'd want to be more thoughtful of it and plant it in early fall, mid-fall, something like that. Get as much roots on it and that kind of thing. You may even want to get it watered in real well. Have it mulched. Basically, you definitely want to keep the ground covered around something that's heat sensitive, because we're trying to regulate the soil temperature with that mulch as well. But again, I know that that Dallas area can be tougher. I mean, it's just it's zone 8A, but it's tough. Those are tough. The full sun there is very tough. There's no question about that. It's definitely it hits different there in Dallas. So I would probably stick with mostly the conifers that are heat tolerant, that are more southern conifers overall. I think you're going to be better off. Somebody's in zone 8A, Milton, Florida. They had a 14-degree night, which is kind of crazy. That's over by Pensacola. I've been through Milton before. I think it's just a little east of Pensacola, if I'm remembering that correctly. They had some amaryllis, and they just melted at 14 degrees. Will they survive? Yeah, in all likelihood. I have amaryllis planted in the ground in Raleigh, and I'm sure that these 16, 15-degree nights we have melted. Probably melted them back since I left. But they typically, if they're established at all, typically they'll come back out of it. They want to know if they should go ahead and cut the foliage. You can if you want to. It's already moderated, I'm sure. That's probably the worst of the cold that you guys are going to have for the winter. So if you want to cut it back whenever you want to clean them up a bit, you can. When I did the Q&A last week, somebody wanted to know if we were camping on Anastasia Island there up at St. Augustine. No, I was camping at an RV campground at St. Augustine Beach, but I have camped at Anastasia before. It's always interesting when I'm in any of these places. People always suggest all the things to do. That St. Augustine area is kind of our go-to once-a-year vacation spot, and I really love that area. It's so much more laid back than other areas. Like Fort Lauderdale, Miami area here, where there's beautiful gardens. I mean, incredible gardens. Even in the place I'm staying right this minute, which is, it's just, it doesn't matter where you go. They're beautiful gardens. But, every time you enter into your Google Maps, where I want to go. If I want to go down to a garden, see the Japanese garden, one of the Japanese gardens down in Miami or something like that, it'll say 8 miles, 41 minutes to get there. The traffic here is so crazy. So we like that St. Augustine area up there quite a bit, but don't tell anybody else. Otherwise, it'll be too crowded. Let's see. So they're in zone 7A, Virginia. They have 2 snowball viburnum. They want to transplant. How should they prune them to prepare for the move? I don't know how big they are. You can definitely move them here during the winter time, late winter. You probably could. If you did it right now, you wouldn't probably have to cut anything off of them. Maybe 7A in Virginia with a snowball viburnum. I'm going to wait. I don't know what snowball viburnum it is. If it's a Chinese snowball viburnum, it's not quite as cold hardy. There's zone 6, I think, cold hardy, but a little bit more iffy for sure. The Japanese snowball or the Eastern snowball is like zone 3 cold hardy. So you could move that thing anytime you wanted to. If it's a Chinese snowball, I might wait a little while longer into the winter, and you could take 25% off the top of it. It will cost you some flowers, because there's usually some flowers in the fall and in the spring on the Chinese snowball. But that would be best practices. Probably cut it back 25%, move the thing in the late winter. If it's Japanese snowball, the European snowball, they're quite a bit more cold hardy, and you could probably move them any time of year. The European snowball any time of year. I had a hard time killing. I don't think I ever killed one of those things in a container ever at the nursery. They were pretty easy to grow. Let's see. So I wrote this one down. This was more of a person, telling a story than anything else. But they were talking about they were planting spring bulbs with their neighbor, and their neighbor rarely ever mulches or amends it, and the neighbor was just asking her, why her plants kind of languished a bit versus the person who's telling the story, who mulches their gardens every year. And there's definitely going to be a lot of difference in spaces that are left unmulched, that are just completely exposed soil, versus areas where you're protecting those microorganisms that I've talked about for a lot of videos over the years. There are beneficial fungi and beneficial bacteria living in these soils that have a relationship with these plants, and pretty much every plant has these relationships in some way, some form or another. Right from the time the seed germinates, or the cutting is taken, or it's put in a container, they have relationships with these things. And those beneficial bacteria, beneficial fungi, they bring water and nutrients to these plants, and these plants are basically sugar-making machines that make sugars that they take down into their roots and feed those bacteria and fungi, okay? And that's the way this relationship has worked. Think of that plant as just a giant solar panel to produce food for things that are living under the ground. It's the things under the ground that need the protection, right? More than the thing above the ground. The thing above the ground is a perfect solar panel, as long as it's placed in the right place. Not all these solar panels want to be out in the full sun. Some of them want to be in part shade, but they're solar panels supplying food to things that live under the ground. So if you have a mulched if your space is mulched in some way, and protecting those things from crazy swings in soil moisture, crazy swings in soil temperature, crazy swings in weediness, and whatever, then you're going to be ahead of the game. There's no question. So yes, that is the reason that the plants in your neighbor's yard without mulch are probably behind, slower growing, languishing a bit, versus where you're mulching all the time. Okay, somebody's had a skip laurel that heaved from the ice. So, the water expands when it freezes, and it can push plants completely out of the ground at times. Now it's at an odd angle. When would be the best time to fix this? With a leafy evergreen like that, I'd probably wait till right toward, a little bit later in the winter. I don't know how cold it is where you are, but I might wait March, to fix that. And then I don't know how much. I don't know how big this thing is or anything else. But typically, I would just dig behind it, so that you can pop it back up, and then you can just tie it back into place without hopefully having to dig it completely out of the ground and replanting it. So somebody wanted to know if they could do their seedlings in larger 6-cell trays rather than 50-cell trays. So all the seeding videos I've ever done, I show 50-cell trays. That's just how I do mine. Again, I have a light rack in the house. I talked about this last week. People wanting to do their seeding outside. That's winter sowing methods outside. Whatever works for you. I mean, I did not start a YouTube channel to be the garden gatekeeper police. I think there's way too much of that out in the world. For me, it's what encouraged you to either collect seed, purchase seed, start seed. Are you having fun with it? Is it a technique that you want to revisit? So for me, I'm so type A. I have to have these perfect little uniform trays under a perfectly uniform light inside, and everything has to be controlled, right? But that's just me, right? You can be, if a 6-cell tray is what you have and you don't want to spend any money, absolutely start your seed in them. You're going to have to, if you're putting multiple seeds in in a bigger thing like that, you'll have to divide them later. So it's one extra step that's not that big of a deal, honestly, as long as you're not, heavy-handed with it. You can divide them out into individual plants later. But if that's the thing that gets you starting seed and gets you moving forward, yes. Again, not the gatekeeper here of anything. I showed techniques that have worked for me, but if you see something else out there that seems easier or matches things that you already own so that you don't have to spend any money, heck yeah, go with that. So somebody has a Eugenia topiary. Eugenia is like if I had to describe it, I would describe it as a tropical boxwood. Okay, so the area I'm in from here over to Homestead is where all these Eugenias are grown this time of year, and little pom-pom, 3-ball things, 2-ball things, 1-ball thing, all kinds of interesting creations they create out of Eugenia down here in Florida, and then they send them out and everybody buys them in the spring as decorative things. If you want to keep one though in a colder area, then you have to bring them in and protect them in some way or have them in a greenhouse. They brought them in, they're losing a bunch of leaves. When can they go back outside? And should they just pitch them into compost now that they're losing a bunch of leaves? The main thing you need to know with a lot of these plants is that most of you probably only need to be bringing things in the house. You don't have to have things in the house all the time. These plants, most everybody watching has breaks in the wintertime where you could take these plants back outside for periods of time. So we just, in my area, went through this period, with basically a week. That plant would have had to have been inside, but now when I'm looking at what the temperature is in Raleigh for this week, that Eugenia could have definitely been outside, for this next week. So I think as much as anything, if you're bringing these leafy, evergreen, tropical things, whatever it is in your house during the winter, there's very low humidity in your house. The heat's running constantly. There's never going to be enough light unless you're adding light to them. I mean, there's no light in a window that's going to, give you what that plant can get outside. So I don't know what kind of, how bad these are now, but if it's warm enough outside in the next week or two, I'd get them outside even during that period of time. Just get them back in if there's going to be any kind of frost on them or freeze on them. But I bet there have probably been nights that you could have had it outside, and the plant would be better off. Again, I don't know what percentage of the leaves have fallen off of it. Usually they're not the most expensive thing, to replace if you had to replace them next year. But I do encourage everybody, if you're bringing plants into a garage, bringing plants into the house, for the winter, if there are opportunities to put them outside in a slightly more humid day that's abnormally warm, that plant's going to thank you for it big time over the course of the winter. Because by the time you bring in most of it, they're starting to decline, and you're just trying to get them to the point where you can get them back outside before that decline has too much. Okay. So somebody rooted, here's another question similar to that. Somebody rooted a hydrangea in Atlanta, Georgia, brought it inside to keep it alive. How often should they water it, and when to plant it in the ground? This is another one that needs to be outside. Water it just to keep it moist. So if you got it in a little container, just put your finger down in the container occasionally. If it's moist, leave it alone. A dormant hydrangea cutting is not going to use very much water, so you're probably going to water it 2-3 times all winter. It would be probably the most that you would water it. But put your finger down in it. If it feels moist, move on. But I would get this thing outside when you can. And you can put it in the ground, March for sure, March or early April without any problem. Let's see. Okay, that'll be it for this week, actually. That's 23 from this past week. Again, thank you guys so much. Also, thank you to everybody who signed up for the Learn to Garden video series. If you don't know, it's a series of videos that I'm creating just to give a step-by-step approach to gardening, and I link all the videos on the YouTube channel, or a lot of the videos from the YouTube channel on each of those videos, so that you can get as much information as possible. And it also organizes this channel, and I don't know how many videos are on this channel at this point, 1,500 or something like that, I think. So yeah, I can't thank you guys enough. Ask your gardening questions down in the comment section down below this video. And again, I hope in the next couple months that I have some fairly exciting news about a future project. Thanks for watching.